So I've been making quite a lot of pieces where I wrap the clay around wooden blocks. These have been selling quite well, and that's good news because it means I can come back and make some more, and I really like working in this way, so I'm quite looking forward to making this group. I've got some that I've made here, a group of 5, but I want a few more than that, so I've got these blocks out. I'm going to wrap some newspaper around them next and then start making. Okay, there are the blocks made, and the next job is to get some clay, start rolling it out, and then applying it around these. So I have different ways of doing this, but one of the techniques I like to use is to get a really thick slab of clay and just very loosely and roughly just wrap that around, quite literally. And if it's not big enough like that, it seems like there's bits missing, then I don't mind that. I'm just going to patch it up, but I'll just join the bits that do stick together. And working with soft clay means that it's easier to join. You know, I can be a bit less careful about scoring and slipping because the clay is soft enough that it really does just push together. And then in terms of filling up that gap, I'm just going to push a bit on like that. I've left a little overhang at the base there, so I can continue wrapping the clay around the base by just cutting it, pushing it, squashing it together. And again, if there's any gaps, just using a bit like that, pushing it in. So I've got quite a thick slab of clay there, and then what I then do is get a wire and make it thinner just by cutting a bit off. So this is quite difficult to judge. I don't want to cut it too thin, I don't want to leave it too thick, so it is just estimation and then pulling a wire through to remove some of that clay, and then I'll just check the thickness by sticking a scalpel in. So I've left that a little bit thick, so I'll try and get a little bit more off. That's better. And the reason I like working like this is that it's I can sort of retain the quality of the soft clay because the piece of wood's inside supporting the form. That gives it some strength, and I can work on the surface in a little bit more of an expressive way. I can make marks into the clay that I wouldn't be able to do if that wood wasn't inside, because the form would obviously just collapse. I'm going to leave a little step in there. Just to break up that, so it's not just straight there, it's just going to have a little step. Okay, that's the start of one of them. I'm going to use, mainly I'm going to use this clay. It's my usual earthstone hand building material, which is good to use. but I'm also going to make some out of this black clay as well. It's quite a gritty black clay that I like using too. So I'm going to do the same thing using a thick slab of clay to begin with, and this one is plenty big enough, so I've got more than I need, so I'm just going to cut it about here. I don't think scoring and slipping it is terribly important, because as I said earlier, the clay is soft enough that it will tend to just stick together by applying a bit of pressure. That's enough to make it stick, really, particularly when you've got a big overlap like that. And this clay has a really nice quality when it's cut through, because it's very gritty. It leaves more of more evidence of that coarseness in the surface, which is really nice, and something I try and preserve really as I'm carrying on making the piece. So I don't want to handle it too much. I think I need to get myself a proper wire. This one's lost a toggle, but it still does the job. Right. Okay, it's still got still quite thick at the base there, so I'll just do that. I do like to just tap the edges down a little bit just to soften them, because when you cut it, I'm left with really quite sharp edges. So just a little bit of pressure while the clay's still soft. You don't need much at all, but that just softens those corners a little bit. Right, here we are. They're lining up. 3 more to make. I'm going to make it wet first of all. This will just help what I've got here is some terracotta slip, but it'll just help that just run down the surface. And I like these marks that are made with this very watery slip. And what it tends to do is when I drag the wire through, it leaves a texture. And because it's so watery, it runs into those lines, and it just sort of highlights those lines a little bit more. So that's a little bit of terracotta slip. It's quite a satisfying thing to do. I quite like just slopping that on there, watching it run down, and again, it's just gone a little bit thicker in some of those marks, and it's not covered the whole thing, so but I think I'm going to leave it like that. Quite like these areas that are left without anything on. And I'm also just going to add a little bit of a brighter colour. I think I'm going to use, on this one, I'm just going to add a little bit of this yellow engobe. It's quite a spontaneous thing. It's quite difficult to talk and do this, because normally I would just sort of make decisions, but I just want a little bit of yellow somewhere, maybe just around here. And in the final piece of work, there might not be much evidence of these marks, because they will get covered up still further with more layers. But that's a sort of base to begin with, and it's obviously very, very wet. But now all I'm going to do is just, I take this and I put it on a plaster bat, and it will just dry out. So I've made all the marks that I want to on the surface of this piece of work with the blocks still in, and I'm going to take them out now. So it is dried a little bit, and it mustn't dry too much, otherwise these are going to get too tight, but these are loose enough to take out. And the sleeve of newspaper also comes out. And it changes the whole nature of the piece of work now, because those blocks of wood are no longer in there. So the whole thing is now more fragile. So I can still work on the surface, but I have to treat it differently now. It's more making sort of subtle, gentle marks in the surface at this point. So this one's in the same position. This one's dried a little bit more. So to get these wooden blocks out, I just have to wriggle them back and forward a little bit till one becomes loose. Once I get one out, then the others come out quite easily. And again, that same as with the last piece, that changes the whole nature of the pot now. Because it's hollow, I have to be a little bit more careful with it. So they're all, I've got quite a few pieces on the go, these two, and down here other pieces that are at various states, drying out, and quite liking what's going on this one. It's currently upside down and still with the wooden block in, but I think that one's looking pretty good. And a slightly larger piece here. So these have just come out of the kiln. This is their second firing, so they've been fired to 1140 degrees C, that's cone 1. And what I do at this stage is have a good look at each piece of work individually and decide whether I think it's finished or not, whether I need to do any more work, whether I think it needs to go back in for another firing. So out of the pieces I've got here, I'll look through each one individually, and this piece here, which is made of the dark clay, my initial thoughts about this is that it's finished. It's quite a heavy piece actually. So when I cut through the clay with the wire, I must have left it a little bit thicker, but I quite like the weight of it. It feels like it's quite substantial. There's a really lovely piece here that I like, where the glaze has gone over these little tiles, and particularly just over this one here, where it's just pulled in the tile and just around the edge of it. So My thoughts about this one is that it's this one is complete after just 2 firings. What else we got? This one, the colours on this, I think for me are a little bit strange. This pink and the yellow together, I don't think I quite like that. I think there's a little bit too much pink just on this top edge here. So with that one, I might try and just paint over that pink with a little bit more yellow, just to make it a little bit weaker. Just to make the pink a little bit weaker there. This one I'm really liking. I've put quite a lot of white glaze over the surface of this, and I really like the bottom edge here. I put this base on just by pushing the clay on with my finger. And I like the way that these marks are retained in the surface and they've been glazed over. There's a nice sort of contrast between this bit that's white and the top bit, which has got a lot more detail in it. With this, I think I'm tempted maybe just to put a little bit of my red glaze on some of these shapes here, maybe just to highlight a few of them, just to give it a little bit more focus of colour, a little bit more intense colour just around this top edge here. So that one will go in for another firing, but it's just it might just be a tiny piece of glaze that it needs, that's all. This one is quite a dark piece. It's made with a lighter clay, but I put a lot of black slip on it, and I like down here some of the runs that have been left with the watery slip, the drips that have appeared are quite more prominent on this side. That little bit of green up here works well too. It contrasts with the slight bit of red down there. But again, with this, I'm tempted, I think, to add perhaps a little bit more colour down in the bottom here, and probably again a little bit of my red glaze just to highlight some of those shapes. But I suppose really at this stage each piece is either finished or it's sort of 95% finished. There's never a lot to do to them. This one I think could be finished. There's some lovely textures here where the wire is pulled through the clay, and you can see the grittiness of the clay. There's a wash of terracotta slip underneath. There's a bit of green, but the white's been painted over the top of it. There's a nice bit of texture here with this crazed engobe that I use. There's some nice texture in the top where I've sprinkled sand and a bit of coloured grog in the top there. So, and again the base just again pushed on with my finger and retain that sort of softness. That's why I like working like this, is that the clay retains a feeling of that softness. In the top edge as well, quite irregular, a little bit sort of rough, a little bit sharp in places. But I think that one's done. So there's I've got about 12 pieces here that I need to look through, and each one of them I'll look at individually and just decide whether there's anything more I want to do. But I've got maybe 5 or 6 that are finished and 5 or 6 that might go for another firing.